I will be reading Claude Anderson's Powernomics. Sun's like beautiful day outside. I will go to the pool later. And I'm starting in chapter 3 because that's the chapter that I said, oh my God, I need to be reading this out loud. I was saying it throughout, of course, the whole intro, but okay, without further ado, 10 pages is the challenge. I'll probably get up to 5 and let you go. But definitely get this book. I got it from my local library. So here we go. Chapter 3, Building Competitive Communities. This nation will be colorblind when whites proclaim their black blood like they proclaim Indian and European lineage. A group's ability to compete is determined by its internal cohesiveness and self-interest. Black Americans must therefore build functional communities within which they can ethno-aggregate, then practice group economics and group politics. Ethno-aggregate is a term that he talks about in his book. A functional community can best be defined as a grouping of people who come together and organize for their own self-interest rather than misdirected altruistic interests. Once built, whether based upon geographic boundaries, ethnic or racial commonalities, a community cares for the collective interests of its members. Building our own communities will allow Black Americans to become economically and politically competitive, but will also give us something we have never had, a chance to compete from the vantage point of our own physical space, cultural values, resources, institutions, and history. For the first time, we will be free to organize and work in our own best interests rather than the interests of a universe of ethnic and class competitors. Excuse me. I'm on vacation, don't judge. Historically, societies were built upon 3 institutions that served as pillars: the family, the church, and the community. True communities are communities of mind and physical structures within a space. Both are important, but no traditional society built on land that it did not own or control has been successful or prospered. Neither the landless European serfs nor the landless Jews under the pharaohs of Egypt were able to do it. For this reason, Black Americans need a solid foundation of communities upon which to begin empowering ourselves. Like Moses, we must begin to build physical communities and maintain a strong sense of community. Moses used his vision of the promised land to mobilize his people for a 40-year journey to a land upon which Jews built functional communities, families, religious institutions, commerce, schools, and a strong sense of a community. Boundary lines, the new color line. Nearly a century ago, W.E.B. Du Bois accurately proclaimed that the color line would be the problem of the 20th century. It's a new millennium now. And it's becoming clear that the problem of the 21st century will be community boundary lines. America is balkanizing along racial, ethnic, economic, and religious lines. Across America, groups are aggressively seeking territory or communities in which they can store their wealth, resources, and political power to enjoy and preserve for their future generations. As noted earlier, Hispanics, for example, are assembling their economic and political intentions behind their Spanish language and culture. They intend to use both to capture territory, rights, and a political base within the United States. The practice of seeking territory for communities will intensify as more and more people from around the world immigrate to America. They come to America in search of a better quality of life, not to integrate with whites or to get along with Black Americans. They are coming to this country to get ahead economically and to find wealth and fortune. They commit themselves to competing with any and all groups economically and politically on behalf of themselves, their families, and their native countries. Typically, their initial destination is close to or within Black neighborhoods. They have learned from official and unofficial sources that they can find great opportunities in Black neighborhoods. Within Black neighborhoods, ethnic immigrants expect to find the least expensive housing, lax enforcement of laws and regulation, and little business competition. They also find readily accessible consumers, government assistance, easy access to elected officials, and employment opportunities. Though they are unaware of the crime problem of Black neighborhoods, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. They find territory and build communities. as ethnics fill in business voids in black neighborhoods with the modicum of success, they begin to practice ethno-aggregation. They bring in and aggregate their families and others from their native lands. They then develop more businesses in black neighborhoods. As they capture territory, they establish powerful economics and political organizations using the ethnic culture, language, and religion as their common ground. I wish we had our own language, don't you? Watching how these new arriving immigrants use a sense of community to build social and economic power bases should be instructional for black Americans. It takes a fully functional community to raise a child and to raise up a competitive race of people. Neighborhoods are not enough. Neighborhoods are problematic for any group seeking empowerment. Unfortunately, most black Americans live in neighborhoods, not communities. A community signifies commitment and the potential for power. Neighborhood does not. Webster's New World Dictionary defines neighborhood as a vicinity or a physical space where there are people living near one another. The concept of a neighborhood implies that an area that is residential in nature with lesser wealth, power, and status than a community. The majority of black Americans live in impoverished black neighborhoods and spend approximately 95% of their annual disposable income with people who live outside of their neighborhood. They spend only 5% of their disposable income in black neighborhoods. They spend 3% with non-black owned businesses that are located in black neighborhoods, but whose owners live outside of black neighborhoods. Let me do that one more time. They spend 3% with the non-black businesses that are located in the black neighborhoods, but whose owners live outside of the black neighborhoods. Gotta emphasize that right. So only 2% is basically staying in your neighborhood. Thus, only 2% of black America's disposable income is spent in black-owned businesses in black neighborhoods. It is impossible for any large population or neighborhood to be self-sufficient on only 2% of its income. By spending its disposable income in other groups, businesses, and communities, black America impoverishes itself and impedes the growth of functional communities. One benefit of Jim Crow segregation was that it forced blacks to build what could appropriately be called quasi-communities. Unlike neighborhoods where people simply live in the same area during Jim Crow segregation, black Americans were unified with a code of conduct. They lived together because they had the same interests and needs, but equally as important, they trusted and depended on each other. From the Civil War until the end of the Black Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, blacks successfully built a vibrant culture. Marginally competitive schools, black churches, personal service businesses, and a professional class. Though small in number, these community assets produce jobs as well as products and services for black people. The desire for integration caused blacks to abandon their businesses, communities, culture, and the code of conduct.
It's 3 o'clock.
The desire for integration caused blacks to abandon their businesses, abandon their communities, abandon their culture, and abandon the code of conduct. Black Americans need to be accepted by white society. Black Americans' need to be accepted by white society was greater than their need to be accepted by black society. Today's black neighborhoods no longer qualify to even be called quasi-communities because they no longer have a network of black businesses or a group code of conduct. Today, black neighborhoods are primarily where the majority of black people eat and sleep. They do not embody the criteria for a functional community. Consequently, black neighborhoods are typically referred to as ghettos, urban areas, inner cities, or they're sometimes identified by terms such as the hood. And we love our precious hood. We need to love a community. These broad, ambiguous terms signal the dependent, non-competitive nature of black geographical areas across the country. Developing a true sense of community. What is a sense of community and why is it important? A sense of community is the collective thinking, seeing, and behaving as a we, not as a me. Social integration has intensified our need for a strong sense of community or a sense of peoplehood. Having abandoned their quasi-communities, culture, schools, and businesses for an integrated promised land, many Black Americans cannot easily return to physical communities that are primarily Black. Those who cannot return can exercise an option. They can identify with Black physical communities and organizations via their mindset, actions, and support. This strong identification and support is what is commonly referred to as a sense of community or a sense of peoplehood. It is what people feel when they have a strong psychological identification with a physical community and its inhabitants. They are attracted to and desire the cultural familiarity, security, and satisfaction that they receive from association with these communities. The psychological damage Blacks have experienced as a result of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and racism will pose significant challenges to developing a strong sense of community. The impact of social engineering on communities. Throughout the relationship between Blacks and whites, the majority white society has kept Black Americans under various forms of control: physical, legal, and symbolic. Challenges to developing a strong sense of community. Throughout the relationship between Blacks and whites, the majority white society has kept Black Americans under various forms of control: physical, legal, and symbolic. The majority society, though, through its primary institutions, has used rudimentary sociological and physical principles to control Blacks and deprive them of their sense of peoplehood. In such a state, Black people could easily be misled into inappropriate behavior, identifying with the oppressor groups and hating their own group. This is not a conspiracy theory. The facts are evident in the marked inequalities between the races and the continued inappropriate behavior patterns of Black Americans. There is no other way to explain why historical inequalities remain unchanged and Black Americans continue to cede and surrender their wealth and resource powers to their competitors, while their own family, community, and the race as a whole remain powerless and impoverished. They are neither innate nor normal behavior characteristics, so let us examine their origins. Research suggests that aberrant group behaviors among Blacks began in 1710 and were formalized into law when the Virginia colonial government introduced meritorious manumission, a public policy that was used to condition and instill internal controls into the psyche of enslaved Blacks. The practice rewarded Blacks who saw slavery through the eyes of the white society. They were willing to work against their own group's best interests and inform on members of their race who were planning to escape and free other Blacks. The social engineering effectively destroyed most Black people's sense of community, trust, and accountability. Though undocumented, many Black Americans believe that soon after its inception, meritorious manumission was merged into what we now call Willie Lynchism. According to popular belief, and I know a lot of us have proven the Willie Lynch to not be true because the only one that was alive around that time wasn't even born before the letter was supposedly written, but I digress. According to popular belief, Willie Lynch came to Jamestown, Virginia in 1712, offering a mind-controlling ideology to destroy Black people's sense of community. A professional slave trainer, Willie Lynch offered to the slaveholders a conditioning system that he granted would instill internal controls that would effectively divide Blacks for centuries. He proposed that slave masters create divisions among Blacks and separate them along the lines of gender, age, tribe, culture, class, rank, and skin color. To this day, the effects of Willie Lynchism or other systems similar to, just because the Willie Lynch letter was proven to be debunked doesn't mean similar letters didn't exist and just weren't burned or something. He proposed, to this day, the effects of Willie Lynchism continue to encourage Black individualism, selfishness, and self-hatred. Though slavery and Jim Crow semi-slavery officially ended in 1865 and 1954 respectively, no formal records are known to have been kept that explain the principles and techniques involved in the conditioning process. If our goal is to build functional communities, we can, however, understand the techniques and methods that were used to destroy our sense of community. We can more fully understand what happened if we analyze a similar and better documented mind-controlled experiment that occurred during the Korean War of the 1950s. And he goes on to talk about techniques used in on prisoners of war. This book is awesome. I think I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages. So yeah, I said I was going to make it to 5. Hope you enjoyed it. Sorry for the distractions. My jewelry getting caught up in my hair. But I challenge you to do the same thing. Whatever book you're reading right now, read it to us. Let us know. You know what I mean? It's hard. I got so many books on my shelf that I want to read. And I would love somebody to read to me. Teach me. You know, each one reach one. You know, we all in this together. We all we got. So teamwork make the dream work. Power to the people. I love you.